Okay, so this video I'm going to show you exactly how to connect a Blazor Server app with Microsoft Entra. And we're going to do everything through the Azure portal, and we're going to do everything step by step in Visual Studio Code using C#. Now, make sure to check out the previous video as well. I've dropped the link in the description. I've also tagged it at the top, and it's part of the entire playlist where we are basically setting up the entire process to make OpenAI's API work with your Blazor Server app. In the previous video, we focused more on setting up the base. This includes Webpack, this includes Docker, and Tailwind CSS for styling. But in this video, we will be focusing on Microsoft Entra and setting it up properly. Now, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. I do appreciate that. I post videos like this on a weekly, daily, and monthly basis. And with that, let's get things going. Okay, so in the previous video, we successfully set up our Docker environment. We also got our Docker compose.yaml up and running, and everything kind of worked the way that we wanted to. We've also set the HTTP port to 5001. But in this video, we are going to focus on setting up Microsoft Entra and setting up all the requirements for it to work in a Blazor Server app. So on the screen right here, I still have the Docker Compose YAML file open. We're going to go ahead and close that. One file that we are going to work with is our Program.cs file. Essentially, what we need to do is we need to properly integrate with our entire Microsoft Entra environment. But before we start coding, let's quickly navigate to Microsoft Azure. Now, for those that haven't watched the previous video, I highly recommend watching it because I do show quite a few things on how to properly set it up. The link is at the top and the link is in the description below. By the way, you can also fork this entire project on GitHub and follow me step by step. All right, so what you're seeing here is the Microsoft Azure portal. So at the top, I've basically typed in portal.azure.com. If you don't have a subscription, make sure to sign up. They do have free subscriptions. I actually have a link in the description below of this video if you were to sign up. Now, what you're seeing here is the home screen. What we are going to do is we're going to work with Microsoft Entra. And if you don't see Entra right at Azure Services, as you're seeing it right there, at the top, you can search and you can type in just basically Entra, and you'll see that the first service that pops up is Entra ID, and that's exactly what we're going to work with. So clicking on that, it will navigate you to the default directory of your entire Microsoft Entra account. Now, one thing is you will notice that I have blurred or kind of blacked out or white out some of the important stuff here. So you won't be able to, for example, see my tenant ID or primary domain. But in your case, that is part of the properties that can and might be important as we are going to set this up. Now, keep in mind though, that this is a default account. This is kind of my dummy account. That is exactly why I have some of the alerts here at the bottom notifying me that some of these things are depreciated and some of the things just require attention. Now, for those that want to set up Entra properly, make sure to follow these alert steps and make sure to tick all the boxes. Security is super important. What we're going to do is we are going to navigate to app registrations. We essentially want to create a proper app for us to connect to our Microsoft Entra. By default, there should not be any kind of applications, but if you have any previous applications that you have connected via Microsoft Entra or even B2C, it will definitely display over here. Now, what we want to do is we want to register a new app registration. So at the top left of the screen, we're going to tap new registration. The first thing it's going to say is going to ask you the user facing display name. So we're going to give it a name. I'm going to call mine Inventory AI App Showcase or Demo. Let's call it Demo. The next setting is we are going to select accounts in this organizational directory only. You can also set the other settings if you want, but I really want to focus just on that. Well, the next step here is asking us redirect URI. Now, redirect URI is going to be localhost and it's going to be port 5001. In our previous video, when we set it up our entire Docker environment, we literally went and set that the port needs to be 5001. And this is very important for everything to work properly. So over here, we are going to match that so that when the user needs to sign in, it's going to redirect to this specific URI. So in that set, we are going to click on web and we will be typing in localhost. And I'm just going to copy and paste over here because I don't want this video to be hours long. But essentially, we're just going to drop that in there. We're going to say HTTPS localhost port 5001/sign-in-OIDC. Once that's done, we're going to hit register and we're going to get this to register within our app. Now, when you register, and again, I will be whiting out or blacking out part of the important information here. But at the top, you're going to see application client ID. You're going to see your object ID and your tenant ID or directory ID. Now, this is very important, and this is part of the entire process to connect our Microsoft Blazor Server app to our Microsoft Entra and get them to properly work in tandem. Now, with that, I want you to take this and just copy it. So opening up a notepad or a text editor, and we're just going to go ahead and copy that in there. I'm not going to do that for now because I will just literally click on the little copy as we do this. But for some people, you can open up Notepad or text editor and just drop it in there. But make sure you destroy it once we're done with everything. All right, so the next step here is we want to set up a certificate and or a secret. Now, we're not going to work with certificates specifically in this demonstration because that can get complicated pretty quickly. However, certificates are most likely the best way to connect, but we're going to use client secret. Underneath client secrets, I want you to click on new client secret. At the top right of the screen, it's going to ask you for a description. Over here, I am just going to type in vehicle inventory AI app demo so that I know. We can also add secret just so that we know that that is what it is. And we can leave the expiry at 180 days, which is 6 months, which is also recommended. So that's good. And we're going to go ahead and add that. Now, once you've created your client secret, we want to copy both the value as well as the secret ID to that of Notepad or text edit. All right. So now that we have our client secret done and we do have the value and the secret ID, let's navigate over to authentication. I just want to make sure everything kind of looks good the way it's supposed to be. And one thing I do want to do is add sign out to the front channel logout URL. So we're going to drop that in there. And it's very similar to what we did over here with 5001. The only difference is we're going to say sign out OIDC. With that all done, we also want to use access tokens. The reason for that is exactly what we're going to use in our Blazor server to properly connect with our Microsoft Entra. And with that all said, everything looks good and everything looks the way that I want it. So we're going to hit save. Okay, so let's navigate back to overview. We're probably going to come back to the Azure portal to set a few settings if something is not working properly. Let's go back to our Visual Studio and let's start implementing Microsoft Entra. Now, the first thing we want to do is open up Program.cs. Now, with this file, things can get a little tricky or complicated. Make sure to drop in the comments below if you get stuck or if you don't understand anything. Now, with the Program.cs file open right at the top, let's open up and give it some space and let's add some required Microsoft ASP.NET Core usings that we are going to use throughout this document. So I'm just going to drop that in there. And essentially what we are doing is we are grabbing authentication as well as cookies, OpenID Connect, and authorization. The other thing that I also want to add is JWT. So we're going to go ahead and drop that in as well. So I'm just going to drop it right at the top and let's give it a little bit more space, open it up here so we can add more things. With that said, we also want to add Identity Framework Core and Identity Web as well as Identity UI. And I'm just going to take that and drop it in right here. With that done, that should be good at this point. We're probably going to come back here and add some more. So we're going to take that space. We're going to decrease that a little bit and get that all to kind of truncate. Now that using section added, let's start by adding our first JWT security token handler. By default, we do want to set this as false. So I'm going to drop it in right there and let's go ahead and hit save. All right. So you are going to notice we do have a lot of squiggly lines everywhere and it basically doesn't know what we're talking about. So we first need to fix that. And the way we are going to fix that is we are going to navigate to our CsProj folder. And at this point, you can see it is bare. There's nothing really going on here. We want to definitely add some packages and package references to this. So to do that, I'm going to click on this and this is in the repo as well. I'm going to add all of the packages. And again, this is in the GitHub. I will also drop it in the description, but let's drop all of the packages that we are going to use throughout this entire project, not just identity or not just authentication. Now with that done, we can hit save and let's go ahead and open up our terminal. So right here, we're going to say open integrated terminal and let's type in .NET Restore. Now .NET Restore will basically look at all these package references and install it properly. So at this point, we can see there's no errors. And if we navigate back to Program.cs, we can see that all the squiggly lines are gone. All right, so coming back to it, we essentially dropped in JWT security token handler .default map inbound claims equals false. Now, there's a reason I'm doing this, and this is necessary to avoid mapping any incoming claims to Microsoft specific claim types, which might not align with your application's expected claims name. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to drop this comment in right here and let's just quickly talk about this. Essentially, we disabled the default inbound claims mapping part, which is super important for Microsoft Entra to work properly. All right, so the next step here is we do want to create a variable. So I'm going to say var initial scopes equals boulder.configuration. Now, by the way, I do have GitHub Copilot, and that's kind of why it's doing that. So if yours doesn't do it, that's fine. What we want to add is configuration, and the configuration I want to do, just going to put it in like this, is going to be downstream API scope. So that's exactly what I want, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to hit tab. And with that, I also want to add boulder.configuration. And specifically to that, I do want to add Microsoft Graph scopes and split. All right, so these scopes are defined in the configuration file, and we will get to that in a little bit. Next step here is we do want to work on our add authentication Blazor services. So I just want to make sure and see if the default comes with any, and it looks like it doesn't. I'm just going to open up some space here so that we can work here. And the first thing we want to do is add a boulder.services.add authentication. Now I can see that GitHub Copilot is giving us a lot of options there, which is not really what I want. Essentially, we're going to open up brackets and say options. We will be adding a couple of options here. Let's go ahead and open up curly brackets and close the other bracket. We're definitely going to expand those curly brackets here in a second, but I just want to add the add bearer token first, as well as add Microsoft Identity web app, and very much similar as what we already did. So opening and closing those curly braces. And last but not least, let's add the token acquisition, and let's finish that off with add in-memory token caches, which is also very important. So I'm just going to drop that in here, and that's going to be the base that we're going to work with. Now, with that base up and running, we can start filling in exactly what we want within this entire thing. The first thing we want to do is create a bind. So we will do a boulder configuration. So I'm going to open up this curly braces. This is the important part because this is where we essentially going to bind everything. All right, so now that we've opened up the curly brackets of Blazor services add authentication options, we can see that my GitHub Copilot already added a few things. So I'm literally just going to hit tab because that's exactly what I want. Essentially, it's options.default scheme. We are using cookie authentication defaults, and we're using authentication schema. The next thing is we're also using default challenges schema or scheme, and it essentially says OpenID connect defaults, and it's referring back to the usings that we've added right at the top. So this is essentially what we need for that. The next step is we want to do pretty much the same for Microsoft Identity web app. So opening up those curly braces, we're going to add a couple of things. The first thing I do want to add is the boulder configuration, and essentially this is where it is going to grab some of the things that we do need. So I've just noticed that I do have an error here, and that is because it's not option, it is option. So we do want to fix that up. What this is doing is this will grab the required information from our AppSettings.json file, which is empty now at this point, but we are going to fill that in here in a second. Going back to our program file, we have added that configuration. I do want to add a few things here as well. And the next one I want to add is the max age. So essentially what this is going to do is we setting a token to a time span of max 8 hours, which essentially means that it needs to refresh the token after a stale token of 8 hours. With that done, the next thing we want to do is create an automatic refresh interval. This is very, very important. So we want to have the token refreshed every 15 minutes. You don't want to be in a situation where we have stale tokens, because if you were to be in that situation, we'll definitely slow down our Blazor server app, but it will also create a lot more issues. And trust me, I've been there before. I've been there in the situation where Blazor server has stale tokens locally. I just couldn't figure out why, but this is one of them. All right, so the next step here is we do want to add a couple of options. So I'm going to say options event, and the one that I want is on remote failure. We want to create an async out of this. So I'm going to type in async context, and we can essentially grab what GitHub Copilot just offered us. I'm just going to clean this out inside though, because what I do want to do here is I do want to add a try and catch. This is personally what I like to do, is code and try and catch. I'm just going to say try, and we do want to add a catch as well. Otherwise, this is not going to work the way it's supposed to. So I'm just going to say catch. Definitely want that exception EX. I'm just going to give it a little space there. All right, so it is complaining about this. It says that this async method lacks a wait, but we'll definitely fix that up because we still need to add a wait in our try. All right, so next thing is we're going to create a var, and I'm going to type in authentication. Probably going to go for something like this, authentication properties, and we want to create a new authentication properties. Next, we do want authentication properties redirect with a /. I'm just going to add that in there. And with that, I also want a logout hint. To do that, we are going to add authentication properties dot parameters logout equals context HTTP context user identity and name. By the way, if I go too fast, drop in the comments below if you need more explanation. The next step here is I do want the ability to sign the user out of the application and redirect them to Azure AD signout. So to do that, we're going to drop in await context HTTP context signout async, as well as OpenID connection defaults, authentication scheme, and authentication properties. All right. Additionally, I also want to add the capabilities to sign the user out if the cookies are stale. So we're going to drop that in right here. Drop that in, hit save. And now I'm going to drop in a console write line. And the reason I'm dropping in the console write line is I want to make sure if authentication failed, it will log out silently, but I want that to be within debug as well. So we're going to add that. The next thing is context handle response and await task, completed task. So I'm going to drop that in right there. All right, perfect. So it is complaining about this. It's just saying that it could potentially be a null reference for this specific context. I'm not too worried about that. Now we do have our try and our catch, and we do have a throw for if something goes wrong. And right here at the bottom, I'm just going to clean up some of these empty spaces. Right here at the bottom, we do have enable token acquisition, call downstream API, initial scopes, as well as add interactive server components. So that is all good. The next step is I do want to build out some of the Blazor services for add authentication. We definitely want to do that above the var app. So giving it a little bit more space here, we can decrease the space there. And what we want to add now is Blazor.services.add authentication. Just going to hit tab there. And what I want to add is options, and we're just going to hit tab over here. And let's go ahead and clean this up because I'm not going to use that specific reference. And I also want to add a semicolon right there at the end. Give this a little bit of space so that we can work within it. One thing we do want to do is get rid of that space. That's definitely going to create a lot of hassle. All right, so first thing is we want to say options, fallback policy. So we're essentially setting up a fallback policy, authentication builder. That's exactly what I want right there. And that is good to go. One thing it's saying here is authentication option does not contain the definition fallback policy. So I want to make sure that I spelled that correctly. Just want to double check everything. And I just realized my issue there. It's not add authentication. It's supposed to be add authorization. So definitely something you can get confused with, but we're just going to change that up and that should fix it. All right. So also going to get rid of that space there. Hit save. All right, so the next step here is we do want to add a few extra things. I'm going to get rid of this default configure HTTP. We don't need that. And this is kind of where the breakpoint is. This is kind of where you move over. Once var app builder.build is done, all of the stuff prior to it will basically be compiled. We do want to make sure that everything that is supposed to be there is added properly. So just scrolling up, I want to double check everything. We do have our builder add authentication. We do have our identity web app in there, and we also have the Blazor services, and within that it says add Razor components. So let's modify some of this a little bit. One thing I do want to do is essentially add Microsoft identity consent handler within this. So we're going to take it right here where it says add interactive server components. I'm going to drop this in right there, and once that's done, oh, and it's got the little squiggly lines, we just want to get rid of that semicolon right there. All right, so next step, I'm just going to take this, what we already created. I'm just going to move it right here just so that I can keep track of everything. Just going to put that right there. All right, so once we've added the Microsoft Identity Consent Handler, the next step is we do want to add a little bit to that though. So one thing we do want to add is boulder.add server side Blazor. And within that, we do want to add exactly that, add Microsoft Identity Consent Handler. All right, so there's one more that I do want to add to this as well. So right below that, I also want to add boulder.services.add cascading authentication state. There we go. That's the one I want. All right. So now that we've done that, now we can go past our var app, which is kind of the breakpoint. Gonna hit save. The next step is I'm just gonna add a map get to this entire process. So what we're going to do, and I want to make sure that I'm dropping it in the right spot because we want to make sure we're doing this correctly. Essentially, we have var app here. We have use HTTP redirection, which is something we definitely want to keep. Next, we want to make sure that we have use routing. Do I have use routing in here? Sometimes it does come with use routing, sometimes it does not. So we're going to add use routing. So just typing in app.use routing, which is the second one. Perfect. The next one is redirection, which we already have. So I'm just going to bring that up nice and neat. And with that, I also want to use static files, which is already here. So that's perfect. We can use that. And the other one that I also want is anti-forgery. So with any new Blazor application, this comes by default, which is good. Now we want to add two more. We do want to add app.use authentication and use authorization. So that's again what we declared above the var app. We're going to drop that in there and app use authorization. Perfect. All right. So the next one we do want to add is a app.mapget. So I'm going to drop that in here. I'm also going to just close the curly braces and let's have a quick chat about that. So we're doing app.mapget/login async HTTP context string return URL / and let's kind of break this out. The first thing we want to do is setting up the properties for the Azure AD challenge. So let's drop that in right here. We're going to create a variable authentication properties, new authentication properties. Next is authentication properties redirect, return URL. And with that, I just want to add a quick if and an else. And this is just essentially going to be part of the entire HTTP context user identity is authenticated or not. And that is where we give the login hint or we give a prompt. And last but not least, we do want to add a HTTP context await. So we're just going to drop that in there. All right. Again, if none of this makes sense, drop in the comments below. I can definitely help answer your questions. I do skip some of these things because I don't want the video to be an hour long or 2 hours long. Trying to get to the point, I feel like is quite important. But again, if you have any questions, make sure to drop in the comments below and make sure to smash that like and subscribe button while you do that as well. Essentially what we did here is we created a map get for our login. I do want to do the same for our log out, which is going to be very similar, just a little bit easier. And what we want to do here is very similar as what we did right above. So creating that map get, I just want to close the curly braces, close everything nice and neat and opened it up. You're going to see the difference though is the /logout. Now with that said, we want to set up the properties for the sign out. So I'm going to create a variable right here and we're going to say authentication properties equals authentication properties. Very similar to what we did right at the top here, but we're breaking it open and we're having a redirect URI, which is going to be the /. I also want to, same as the top, we want to create an await HTTP context, essentially have two, sign out async, OpenID, connect defaults, and the same for the cookies as well. So we're going to drop that in here as well. This, what we did right here with the app map get login, log out, this is what's going to happen when the user clicks on a sign out button. And this is essentially going to log them out. Again, you don't really need this part. It's good to have this as a base because it can definitely help you in the future with any other types of projects as well. And again, I reuse a lot of this Program.cs with multiple projects that I work with. The last thing I do want to add is a use endpoints, and I'm just going to drop it in here real quick. We have it right here and that should be good to go. So I'm going to hit save. If everything goes as planned, our application should work. The only thing that is still left before we test this is our AppSettings.json. We do need to go and populate that properly. So navigating to AppSettings.json. All right, so now that we have the AppSettings.json open, you're going to notice that it comes with two things already. It's got the logging and the allowed host. Now, the logging and log level, we are going to touch base on that in upcoming videos because I do want to explain in detail how to set this up properly. But one thing we do want to add here is Azure AD. So coming back to our Program.cs, we are referring and referencing in the code that we just created. We are referencing, and I just want to pinpoint that exactly. I think it was in the builder right here. No, not this one, but this one for sure. We are referencing Azure AD. So we definitely want to set that up within our app settings. Now, again, this is not ideal for production because essentially what we're doing here is we are setting up our tenant ID. We are setting up our secret. We are setting up our security type, our client secret and everything. That's not ideal for production, but for development, this is ideal. For production, we are going to use Azure Key Vault. We're going to do that later on in the upcoming videos because this is definitely not the right way to do it, but for development, it should be good enough. All right, first thing we want to do is create Azure AD. So I'm just going to type in Azure AD. We're going to open up curly braces for that one. Just want to add a comma here just so it doesn't complain on us. And the first thing I do want is instance. I'm just going to do it like that. I'm going to add a comma in there because we are working with JSON. I'm actually going to use the tab there and just change the domain because we want to say tenant ID. And let's duplicate this, type in client ID. With that done, the next one I do want to add is, I'm just going to duplicate this actually. We're going to type in client credentials. Here I want to open up an array, so we are going to go have a little comma there, open this up, have the curly braces opened up, and that's exactly what I want. So we are going to have client secret. We don't need the scope, so let's change this up. I'm actually going to cut this, drop that in there, have that comma so it doesn't complain with us. I'm going to say source type, and then we also have the client secret. So at this point, that looks pretty good. All right, so the next step here is we do want to populate this, and we're going to start with the client secret. And so the client secret is when we go back to the Azure and we created that client secret and we put it in our text editor, that's essentially what we're going to drop in here. So I just want to go and have a look at that again. So we're going to take our secret. So we're going to take our value here, which it basically blanked out, but we did copy that to the text editor previously, and we're going to drop it in right here. You're going to notice sometimes when you do copy it, it does things like this. So we just want to clean this up. All right, perfect. Now, obviously I have blanked everything out so that we can't see it. Going to the overview, we do want to start with the tenant ID, which is the directory ID as well. And you can literally hit this and copy it. And we're going to drop it in where it says tenant ID. Going back to Azure, we can do the same for our client ID, which we're going to drop in right here where it says client ID. And the last thing we do want is the instance. And the instance in this case is going to be the URL that we're going to use to connect everything. In this case, it's going to be login.microsoftonline.com. All right, so now we do have the basics in our app settings and our Azure AD, and we've also connected that into the Program.cs. The other thing I also want to add is just the downstream API. I'm just going to copy and paste that in, but that's definitely important for all of this to work correctly. So I'm just going to drop it in right here. Another thing I also want to add is a fallback path that we can add right here, adding a sign in OIDC. It's not needed, but it's definitely good to have that. All right, so with that all said, let's test it. Let's see if this is going to work. We might need to go back to Azure to set a few things to get this to properly work, but let's have a look. All right, so to test this, the first thing we do want to do is go to the terminal and type in .NET build. All right, so now that we've builded, I do see we do have a couple of warnings, but when I look at it, it just basically refers to the possibility of null. So at this stage, not really something to be concerned about. The next step is we do want to type in .NET watch run, and this is essentially where we're going to test the entire thing. So let's hit enter. Okay, so as you can see, we do have an endless loop. So we definitely want to figure out what is going on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop this by hitting Control-C. And it looks like it's complaining about line 121 and 123 on our Program.cs when I look at the bottom here. Let's have a look at what's going on there. So that's going to be right at the bottom here. It's basically saying 121 and 123. Let's see, 121. So it's basically complaining about this. So what I'm going to do at this stage is I'm just going to take it out and just test what is going to happen with that not being there anymore. And there we go. We have everything working the way it's supposed to. I have this right here, which basically says permission requested. And essentially what it's doing is it redirected us to login.microsoftonline.com. And next step is we can hit accept and see what's happening. So at this stage, we do have the base up and running. All right, so one thing I did notice is when I look at the run.net watch run here at the bottom, it is trying to use HTTP. It's not using the proper setup. For us to get this to work, I'm just going to stop this. I'm going to shut this down. One thing I do want to test though, is I want to test this in Docker. So I'm just going to type in Docker compose down and Docker compose bold, no cache. All right, so now that we've built it, and this sometimes does take some time. Next one is we're going to say Docker compose up, and let's see what happens. Opening up our browser, I'm just going to test this by going in incognito or in private browser, and let's go to localhost 5001. Now, as you can see, it redirected us to Microsoft. That is a good sign. The reason why it didn't work previously is because when we did a .NET Watch run, it worked on a different port, which is not that of 5001. In the next video, when we set up Cosmos DB, I'm going to show you how to set up a custom watch run profile that will listen and set port 5001, which will make this entire process work. Okay, so at this stage, we can test this out. Let's see if it works. So I am going to go back and select a user. Obviously, I'm going to blank out some of this, but I do want to test one of these users. So let's drop that in right there and let's see if this is going to work. You can test it on your end as well. I'm just going to hit accept and see what happens. And there we go. We are in our Blazor application. See, the authentication is working perfectly. If you have any issues with Microsoft Entra at this point, definitely drop in the comments below. I'm here to help because I have struggled a lot to get this to work the way it's supposed to. So at this stage, we do have a secure Blazor framework up and running, and you can always double check that by looking at the information as well, because we can see if we dig in here, we'll definitely see that it does use, for example, right there, access tokens. So everything is kind of working the way it's supposed to, which is good. Okay, so with that, we do have Microsoft Entra working properly. In the next video, we are going to focus on Cosmos DB. We are going to set up Cosmos DB using Microsoft Entity Framework. We're also going to set up a proper CRUD sequence. And the other thing is, and this is kind of going to be like bonus content, we are going to create a custom little Python app that is going to generate about 1,000 vehicles that we can put in our Cosmos DB. And this is definitely going to help us test this entire project. Now, this video, the previous video, and all the future videos that I am posting, it's all about how to set up a proper Blazor Server app and connecting to Azure OpenAI's API to get a chatbot to work the way that we want it. And when I say work the way that we want it, we're going to connect our Cosmos DB with ChatGPT so that we can ask it specific questions about our data. With that said, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button because I will be posting the next video here shortly. And again, it's all about Cosmos DB in the next video. And again, this is all about getting to connect with OpenAI and ChatGPT. Thanks for watching.